Hi, welcome back. I'm glad that you made it to part 2 of the MLS Comprehensive Exam. This is Michael Thayer again, fall 2017, and my advisor is Dr. Gary Anderson. So we left off in our last part 1 talking about proposed solutions to the problems. So really it boils down to the expression, together we think better. We need to start a PD committee formed of teachers on staff and myself. Potential areas for professional development, as we have identified thus far: a new approach to showing growth on test scores, English learner training for all teachers, student culture versus classroom culture, multiculturalism, and creating cultures of thinking across the curriculum in every classroom. From a professional development committee, we want to walk through the same research that I have done. Together, we will analyze data and formulate a professional development plan for the coming school year. And as we have identified, these are some different areas that we have talked about. New approach to showing growth on test scores, English learner training for all teachers, student culture versus classroom culture, multiculturalism, creating cultures of thinking across the curriculum in every classroom. So what are English learner needs? Let's talk about that. That's one of the areas that we want to do some training in as a staff. So what might that training look like? Well, let's do a quick review. We're not going to go over the entire slide because we already read this earlier. But we do want to focus and emphasize that English learners have unique needs that other students who are not English learners may not have. And so we need to make sure we are meeting those needs, because if we are not, then those students are not learning. And that's how it basically boils down. And as we saw on this slide, learners that are English learners, so English is not their first language, they're basically creating meaning and understanding things through a lens that's not only cultural, but it's also linguistic. Just minor little details. For example, I know in my work, my previous work, I have seen that, for example, the word table in Spanish, the word mesa is table if you eat off of it, and the word tabla is table if it's a table in a textbook, right? Table with data on it. So sometimes when teachers will say, look at the table in your textbook, an English learner who is from a Spanish background might not initially understand what that is. They might, but that could be one minor example of that. So it really does show the complexity of teaching English learners. Let's take a look at some other literature that we have on ELs and how we can help ELs. So first of all, improving teacher practice, teaching self-efficacy, and LTELS student achievement require a systems approach to professional development. Teachers need sufficient time for planning, implementation, and development of new learning. There's an extended focus, 1 to 3 years, that includes interactive coaching, demonstrations, and hands-on learning. So one of the things that we want to focus on is that PD and improving a school is not something that should be seen as a 1-year process, but rather a multi-year process. Let's also talk about something called EL shadowing. So EL shadowing is basically when a teacher or administrator follows an English learner to several classes. Neither the student nor his or her teachers know the real reason that the observer in the back of the room is there, which is to look specifically at the student's use of academic language, which is really what our main goal is with high school and upper level English learners, is developing that academic language. Also, it increases teacher awareness of the academic language needs for the English learners and their struggle to fully participate in classroom discourse. So EL shadowing is an important way of creating empathy amongst the adults in the building to sort of understand where are our English learners at. A couple of really specific strategies that we want to put out there. One is called the Think, Pair, Share. And this is a chart because one of the things we're talking about tonight is documenting the students' thinking. And so this is a way of documenting thinking. It can be used for not just English learners, but specifically it can be helpful for English learners. You'll see right here in this area is this left column is where the student writes down their initial thoughts. The middle column is where they write down thoughts that they have after speaking with a partner, one partner. And then the final column is the thinking that is recorded when the students are sharing out to the entire class. That's what think, pair, share is. Also, there's a common way of defining new vocabulary called the Freire model. As you can see, we write the word in the middle, its definition in the top left, characteristics of that word in the top right, examples of that word in the bottom left, and non-examples or antonyms in the bottom right. Research has actually showed that when these two items, think, pair, share, and Freire model definitions are used in conjunction with one another, it increases student academic language. And this can even help with mathematical concepts, so it's not simply for ELA. And of course, as we've identified earlier, ELA and math are both the areas in which we're seeing that our school is flatlining with its growth, and we've also seen a big increase in the population of Hispanic students. So we're operating under those assumptions. Banks and Nieto elaborate on the importance of multicultural education. So that's also something that's related to English learning, but it does focus more on not necessarily people who are coming from different linguistic backgrounds, but also just the fact that each of our students is coming from a different, maybe slightly different, maybe very different culture than one another and than our culture as teachers. So essentially, language, culture, and experience affect prior knowledge and ways of knowing. There's an example I know from my school. We offered a writing prompt in our English class that asked students to decide what sorts of materials they would bring with them if they had to cross a desert. And what was unexpected but that started happening was students who were Hispanic started talking about how, hey, my parents or my uncles and aunts actually did this. They had to cross the desert to get into the United States. So it actually became more than a simple hypothetical activity for many students. It was something they actually had experience with, so it had more meaning to them, and perhaps the prompts could have been adjusted in a way to more closely relate to those students and where they're coming from. And really effective schools reach learners at home, so we activate students' prior knowledge. We know and respect where they're coming from and what their values are, their culture, their languages, and we also involve them in creating a school culture. So we're talking about two types of culture here. Student culture, what they bring into the school building with them, and then a school culture, which is unique to the school. It's almost like a school is almost like a country, and students immigrate there, and students from down the street, students from other countries, they all kind of come there, and we can create, and we do create, a unique culture at a school. So we need to talk about how important it is to know what culture we are creating as the adults in the building, and to all be on the same page as each other so that we are creating a unified culture for our students. So really a culture of thinking is the type of culture that we want to create. There's a need to shift from transmission learning to social learning pedagogy. This is basically learning from each other rather than everyone just learning from one adult in the classroom. Teachers have responsibilities for the culture of thinking. Those are having expertise in content pedagogy, so knowing the things that you're teaching, having a climate for learning, environment of trust and safety, essential monitoring and feedback promoting student understanding, passion for the growth mindset versus fixed mindset. In other words, you can learn new things versus, oh, I'm always bad at math, right? So focus to a broad range of outcomes beyond test scores, such as self-regulation, conceptual understanding, multiple strategies, risk-taking, respect for self and others, and active citizenry. The way that we can measure, there are many ways actually, the ways that we can measure student thinking include student videos, concept maps, written narratives, oral narratives, graphics, artifacts with annotations, and portfolio. Okay? So those are all ways that we can actually document student thinking. David Lang, in his review of Richardt's work, identifies Richardt's 8 forces tied to thinking cultures. They are expectations, language, time, modeling, opportunities, routines, interactions, and environment. So what we really want to take away from this slide is that there are documented strategies and things that need to be mastered in order for us to create cultures of thinking in our buildings, in our schools. So let's talk about students thinking and how to document it a little bit more. So we want to create a transparent system so that students and observers can see what students are beginning to understand. And ideas are discussed, but they're also carried forward. Teachers document via student journals, teachers writing on board, audio or video recordings of students, chalk talk, which is where students can write their discussion as an idea web or flowchart on the whiteboard. So one student might write a question up here. Let's see, question right here. And another student can come over and write the answer to it, or another follow-up question next to it. And then maybe another student answers over here related to the original question. So those are all documented by Richard, by the way. Thinking routines. Students should be able to think creatively, critically, and deeply. That's something that we want to have in our 21st century schools. Students should form habits of observing, analyzing, and questioning. Thinking routines are short series of steps that can be used alone or with a group. They include, for example, connect, extend, challenge, see, think, wonder, or see, wonder, think, asking deep questions, making connections, generating explanations, challenging ideas, shifting perspective. Thinking routines make the complex accessible. So this is very important not only for all students in 21st century and how things are now, but definitely for students who are new to the English language, who are learning it for the first time, and students who are coming from different cultural backgrounds. It's very important that we don't assume that students are all thinking the same ways, that we allow them to document how they are thinking so that we can give them feedback on that and we can see what they're thinking. That's visible learning right there. So start using these thinking routines. They're applicable to any learning area. The more we use them, the more the kids will continue learning. Also, it supports learners in developing deeper understanding. Academic language. So we've talked a little bit about academic language. So in the inquiry project, we see students sit in a circle facing each other. The students raise their hands, and the teacher calls on a student to speak, reminds all students to look at the student to show they are listening. So we have that sort of classroom culture present, right, where we have certain ways of doing things in the class. So in this particular class, in the inquiry project video, we saw that happen. Also with questioning, the teacher asks, why do you think that? So that's a very interesting way of really challenging students not only to answer questions, but then to answer, why do you think what you just said? So it's kind of cool. Collaborative learning. Students have an open-ended challenge that require everyone to play a part in the film called Table for 22. It's a really neat lesson that demonstrates how a teacher used Thanksgiving and collaborative learning to have students work on geometry in their math class. So this is another thing that can get people thinking, is having different engaging types of lessons. Academic language and thinking routines. So in Interpreting Ancient Art, it's a video about a class in which a teacher shows videos. The teacher tells, or not videos, but pictures of different artifacts and art related to different periods in history. The teacher tells the class, orally read the learning topic for me, please. So he has obviously incorporated that into his classroom culture, orally read, so he's modeling using academic language like orally read. See, wonder, think. So look at something closely and create a thoughtful interpretation of what you are looking at. And right there, we are going to pause and pick up in part 3 of this recording. Thank you, and see you soon.